If you're an AQA A-Level Business student looking for a video to revise all of Unit 6 HR, well, this video is for you because we're going to go through everything that you need to know for your exams, including the difference between soft and hard HRM. We'll also take a look at some important calculations that we can conduct with our HR data. We'll identify any key terms that you need to know about organisational structures and design. We'll then take a look at motivation, including those key theories of motivation. And then we'll wrap up the session looking at employee and employer relations. Let's get into it. Now, the first topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be the different objectives that a HR department may set. Now, there are a couple different ones that we can look into. First of all will be around employee engagement. Now, employee engagement is the level of commitment, enthusiasm, and emotional connection employees have towards their work, their team, and the organisation. So the better the employee engagement, the better your employees are working, the more committed they are. We can also look around talent development. Now, talent development is the process of enhancing employee skills, knowledge, and potential to help them grow within an organisation. So if we look at talent development, then employees have got more skills, they've got better knowledge, the quality of the business may increase. We can also look at a HR objective around training. So this is where we as a business help develop the skills of our employees. We can look at on-the-job training, off-the-job training, and many other different methods. We could also look at setting a HR objective around diversity, because as an organisation, we show that we value the benefits of a diverse workforce, because we start to get different perspectives. And we want to make sure as well that employees have equal opportunities and we don't discriminate them based on certain demographic characteristics. We could also look at the alignment of employee and employer values. So we as a business, we're ensuring that our staff share the organisation's mission, the culture and the goals, which could help lead to greater motivation. And finally, we could look at the number, skills and location of our employees. Quite simply, this HR objective just ensures that the business has the right number of employees with the necessary skills in the right locations, just to help make the organisation become more efficient. The next topic that we'll take a look at in this revision video will be the difference between soft and hard HRM. First of all, what do we actually mean by soft HRM? Soft Human Resource Management. Now, essentially, soft HRM is a people-focused approach. Basically, we are trying to emphasize that we care about our employees, that a high emphasis is put on employee well-being. So we want to make sure that our employees are motivated, and we also look at the development of those employees, so providing them training. So what the employees will start to receive? Well, they're going to be receiving competitive salaries and competitive benefits. So we want to pay our employees fairly. They will also receive opportunities for training because, as we said, we care about the development of our employees. And as well, we want to make sure that we're communicating with our employees. So for example, if they are unhappy with something, maybe they want a little bit more work-life balance where they're working from home 2 or 3 days a week, we communicate with them and we try and make that work for them. Now, the biggest benefit of soft HRM is that you're going to have a more motivated workforce. The employee morale should increase, which of course, if motivation increases, this can improve the productivity of the business, the quality of the business. And you'll also find the business's culture is strong and we are more collaborative and we have a culture that is open to change. And if people are happy at the workplace, then less of them would want to leave. So you may find labour turnover decreases. More on that in just a moment. But of course, if we are adopting this soft HRM approach, as we said, we're providing competitive salaries, we're investing in training, so most likely the business's costs are going to go up. And then we have hard HRM. Now, hard human resource management is a cost-focused approach. So quite simply, we are treating our employees as costs. And like any cost and any expenses within a business, we try to minimize them because we want to focus on profit and profitability. So we are just treating those employees as resources that we want to try and maximize efficiency and maximize productivity. So what employees may receive now under this hard HRM approach? Well, they may receive lower salaries. They may not have job security. And as a business, we may look at making employees redundant to try and minimize the costs as a company. Now, this can be a good approach because we may be lowering our labor expenses. We may be providing the business with better short-term profitability. Now, of course, the long-term success of a business does depend on their employees, whether they're motivated, whether they've got strong employee morale. Now, with a hard HRM approach, it's not that likely to have a really motivated workforce who absolutely love their jobs. The next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be around the calculations that we need to conduct in human resources. And within our HR data, there's a few calculations. Starting off with labour turnover. Now, essentially what labour turnover is the rate of employees leaving the business. Now, sometimes students get this mixed up because they see the word turnover, and of course, another word for revenue is also turnover. But in the case of labour turnover, it's just the number of employees leaving the business over a specific period of time. The way we calculate that is we take the number of employees leaving the company divided by the average number of employees during that same period. And of course, we want to get this as a percentage, so times by 100. Now, as an example, let's say I've got this HR data in front of me. At this point in time, we have 15 employees leaving the business, and the average number of employees during that specific time period was 200. Now, to do the calculation, quite simply, you take the number of employees leaving, 15, divided by the average number of employees during that period, 200. And of course, we times by 100 to get a percentage. So my labour turnover here is 7.5%. Now, typically, a business would want to have a lower labour turnover. But this does depend on the industry. Some industries you may see a higher labour turnover on average. So what the business wants to make sure is that they're looking at their competitors, and they also want to look at past data. Has labour turnover been increasing or decreasing over time? Part of the formula is to divide it by the average number of employees. Now, they may not give you the average number of employees, but don't worry, it's really simple to work this out because all you want to do is you take the employees at the start of the year plus the employees at the end of the year. Instead of the year, it may be a month, it may be a week, it may be a different time period. And then what you want to do is just divide that by 2. And the reason why we divide by 2 is because that's how many figures we're adding together. So you add them all up, divide by how many you are, that's how you get the mean. And remember, during this period of time, employees at the start of the year plus employees at the end of the year, we may also be hiring those employees, which is why we want to do the average number. So, for example, let's say the number of employees at the start of the year is 250, at the end of the year is 240. Add those two figures together, divide by 2 to get you an average number of employees of 245. As we've said, a higher labour turnover typically causes a disadvantage for a business because you've got more employees leaving the company. If you need to replace those employees, you're going to have to invest money into recruitment, selection, training those employees. But not only that, it depends on who's leaving the business. Because if you have really skilled employees leaving the company, that can cause a lot of problems because they're taking their knowledge with them. And who do you think they're going to go to? Most likely, they're going to go to your competitors. However, as I've said, it depends on the industry. For example, if we had a high labour turnover where the employee skills are fairly low, that's not the worst thing in the world. And typically, we see high labour turnover in seasonal industries. Another really important calculation will be labour productivity. We looked at productivity earlier on in Unit 4 within operations, which all productivity is the output per something. In the case of labour productivity, it's your output per worker. So essentially, on average, how many units is each employee producing? The way we calculate that, really simple calculation, we do the output during a specific period of time divided by the number of employees over that specific period of time. Now, to show you guys an example, let's say over our previous year, we've produced 150,000 units. And over that year as well, we had 500 employees. So to do that calculation, we do the output during that period, 150,000 units, divided by the number of employees, 500, to get me a labour productivity of 300 units per employee. Now, that's how you would typically measure it. You can talk about the specific product or service they're making. So for example, if we're producing water bottles, that would be 300 water bottles per employee. Now, the best way to improve productivity is going to be motivating your workforce, because they're going to want to work harder. They're going to care more about the job. Now, the issue with labour productivity is that you may try and motivate your workforce to have a higher labour productivity. You may invest in training so they're more skilled, so they're working at better efficiency rates. This can be slightly problematic because if I'm working harder, I may want to be paid a little bit more money. So of course the business's cost could increase. However, increasing labour productivity is quite beneficial for a business because it can help reduce unit costs. Of course, we need to understand, have fixed costs gone up as a result of increasing labour productivity, maybe higher wages and maybe more training for those employees. Another important calculation in HR, which students tend to forget about, is employee costs as a percentage of turnover. It pretty much is what it says. Now, when we look at employee costs as a percentage of turnover, it's a simple calculation. We take the employee costs, divide that by turnover, and remember, when we look at turnover now, we're not looking at labour turnover, we're looking at the business's turnover, the business's revenue, and we times that all by 100 to get a percentage. Let me show you guys an example. Let's say I've just got this HR data. The business's turnover over this specific period of time is £15 million, and we've paid 8.5 million in terms of employee costs, so salaries and wages and whatnot. To do that, to get the employee costs as a percentage of turnover, first of all, get the employee cost first, 8.5 million, divide that by the turnover, £15 million, times all of that by 100, and we get employee costs as a percentage of turnover of 56.67%. But the employee cost as the percentage of turnover indicates how much of a business's revenue is spent on wages, spent on salaries, which can impact profitability. Now, a high employee cost as a percentage of turnover may suggest high wage expenses or inefficiencies, whilst a lower percentage could indicate better cost control or automation that the business is using. So it depends if we're labour intensive or capital intensive. But this piece of HR data is particularly important for service-based businesses where your labour is going to be a key cost for the company, which will probably be the biggest impact on the business's profitability. And the very last HR data calculation that we need to do is labour cost per unit. Once again, another simple formula for you guys to remember. All you do is you take the labour costs, divide that by the units of output. Think, when you look at labour cost per unit, anytime you see the word per, it just means you are dividing them by one another. So, to show you guys an example, let's say I've got this data in front of me. My labour cost £1.5 million, and we've produced 90,000 units. And all we have to do is divide those two figures by each other. So we take the labour cost, £1.5 million, divided by the number of units produced, 90,000 units, which would give me £16.67 per unit. Now, typically a business would want to reduce their labour cost per unit. We can do this in a number of different ways. Maybe introducing more automation, more machinery into the business. Because the lower the labour cost per unit, it may indicate that the business is able to increase their profitability. Their profit margins could go up. Or if this helps them reduce their overall unit costs, they can be a little bit more competitive with their pricing strategies. Now, of course, if you are reducing your labour cost per unit, you may need to train your employees. You may need them to be more productive, which of course can actually end up costing more money. But the problem is you don't want them to be rushing their work either, because the issue is if we are looking at a lower labour cost per unit, they may be rushing work, and that could have a big damage on our quality. The next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be our different organisational structures. Now, we've got a few different ones to go through. Now, an organisational structure is just how the business basically organises their employees, how the business organises the communication channels, how they organise the hierarchy, how they organise a level of authority that someone has within the business. And first of all, we've got functional. Essentially, when we look at a functional structure, we are separating the business into its different functions. Now think, we've got four main functions that we've been learning about in A-Level Business. We've got marketing, we've got operations, we've got finance, and we've got HR. So what we are doing, we are organising people into teams, into groups, depending on what function they're in. So if you're working in marketing, you will be working with the rest of the marketing department. If you work in operations, you'll be working with the rest of the operational teams. So what you end up having is that each individual function will form their own team rather than the organisation itself. Now this can be quite a good thing because you're sharing expertise with other people who are doing similar jobs than you. So you may be learning from one another, you may become more efficient and more specialised within that function. The problem is that this though can cause coordination issues, especially as the business expands, because we'll look into factors such as diseconomies of scale. Now the reason why we may start to have coordination issues is because we may have a bit of a silo effect, where the marketing team just wants to benefit the marketing, the operation teams just wants to benefit the operations. So what we may have is that these business functions, they're not communicating with each other. So the business isn't this one unity and one collaborative culture. The next type of function we have could be product-based. Now, the product-based structure is an organisational structure where a business is divided into separate teams or divisions based on different products or product lines that they sell. Now, each team operates independently. They will manage their own aspects like marketing, production, sales, for their specific product. Now this structure, it can allow the business now just to focus more so on product development, how their specific product can meet and satisfy customer needs, how they can respond to changing customer needs. But the problem is it can lead to challenges such as internal competition, duplicated efforts, because we may be doing the marketing for the one product which could be used for another product, but we're not communicating a lot. So those inefficiencies, if coordination between the teams are lacking, can be quite damaging for the business. You'll typically find though it is commonly used by larger corporations who do have a bit of a diverse product range, such as a multinational corporation. But what you'll find is that typically these multinational corporations will tend to opt more for the regional organisational structure. A regional structure is where a business is divided into their teams or divisions based on geographical regions, such as countries, such as continents, or to meet specific local markets. Now, each regional division operates semi-independently, managing their own functions like sales, marketing, operations, to try and better cater to the local customer needs, different regulations of different countries, different market conditions. Bit like a decentralized approach. So rather than just having this one headquarters in one country and we have all the decision making power there, we decentralize that decision making power. Now, this structure, as I've said, typically used in multinational companies because they need to improve their responsiveness and adaptability in the different regions they operate in. However, challenges can still arise though. Potentially costs may be increasing due to duplication of resources, potential inefficiencies, and also difficulties in maintaining this one unified corporate strategy across all the different locations. And the final organisational structure that we have is a matrix structure. Now, I've given you an example of what a matrix structure looks like on the screen. Essentially, this is just a framework where employees will report to multiple managers, typically both a functional and a project manager. Now, the aim of the matrix structure is to promote collaboration, especially across different departments. So if a business is handling lots of different projects, for example, in engineering, they're able to cross-collaborate. You know, I've given the example of marketing, IT, finance, sales, and operations, but you could have hardware engineers, you could have software engineers, you can have IT specialists, software programmers. And the idea here is that you want to get your employees working in teams. Now, there's a theory that you'll learn in year 13 of Handy's corporate culture model. Essentially, this refers to the task culture, where you want people to be working collaboratively. And this can actually improve the employees' motivation because they're working in teams. Now, in terms of how authority is distributed, well, it depends on the skill that you have. It depends on the expertise you can bring to the team. The next topic that we're going to take a look into will be organisational design. Now, the key thing with this is to start introducing you guys to some key terms. Now, the first of these key terms will be about authority. Essentially, what authority is the power or right assigned to individuals or positions to make decisions, give orders, and allocate resources within the organisation. So what you'll see is a manager will have certain subordinates reporting to them. And essentially, your manager has authority over those subordinates. They tell them what to do, they give specific orders. But then your subordinates may have their own chain of command where employees will report to them because they're higher up in the hierarchy. Now those subordinates will have authority over those employees, over their subordinates. We've got subordinate inception. The next one we have is the span of control. Now there are two ways of categorizing this. We've got wide span of control and we've got narrow span of control. Now first of all, what we mean by span of control is just the number of subordinates that a manager will essentially be looking after. So previously when we just looked at authority, we had one manager and they had 3 subordinates that they looked after. That is their span of control. It's the number of employees that they can effectively oversee and manage within the organisation. Now, as I said, we've got 2 ways of categorising it. We've got wide and we've got narrow. They should probably explain what that means. Essentially, a wide span of control, you're just looking after more subordinates. So even though I've said 6 here, it could be more, it could be 10, it could be 20. Now, with a wider span of control, typically the manager will have less time to supervise each employee. So this would work quite well in an organisation where you've got highly experienced, highly skilled employees. Now, the problem is that if you adopted this where you've got employees who aren't really that skilled, not really motivated, well, your manager, your leader can't provide you with the right direction. They can't provide you with the right support. But as I said, works well, highly skilled, highly experienced, because you're having to trust your employees more. You're giving them a lot more autonomy. You're giving them more empowerment because they have now more responsibility to look after themselves. But what you'll also find is that when we do have a wider span of control, typically there are fewer levels within the hierarchy. What that means is that there's fewer manager levels. So you'll typically find vertical communication can flow a lot quicker up and down the organisation. But we've also got narrow span of control. But if wide span of control is that you're looking after a fair few employees, narrow span of control, we're just reducing the number. So before, wider span of control could be 6, 10, 15 employees. Narrow, maybe only a couple, maybe only 3 employees. For the manager, they're able to supervise those subordinates a little bit more closer. They're able to help those employees. They're able to help them with their skill development. Now, of course, if you have a narrow span of control, typically the manager can supervise you a lot more and they may start to micromanage you. So you'll find that typically a narrow span of control works in these tall organisational structures. There's lots of levels within hierarchy and typically communication flows one way, from the top down the organisational chain of command. But it can work quite well, especially for the managers who are potentially supervising low skilled and low experienced employees, because there's a lower chance of them burning out as they have less subordinates to look after. And I've also been using the term hierarchy. But what does hierarchy actually mean? Well, all hierarchy is the system that ranks employees in levels of authority, from the highest to the lowest. So the higher that you are within the hierarchy, the more authority you have, the more power, the more decision-making responsibility. And it also shows who reports to who within the business. So as we said, hierarchy, it's the structure of an organisation that shows those different levels of position, different ranks. At the very top, with those senior managers, you've got your chief executive officer. These are the people who are ultimately responsible for the strategic decision making of the business, the long-term strategies. Whereas the bottom of the hierarchy is your frontline staff. These are people who have limited decision making power in terms of those strategic decisions, but they're more responsible for the day-to-day operations of the business. And typically they will just be following the instructions that someone higher up in the hierarchy has given to them. And the very last key term of this section that we need to look into is this concept called delegation. Quite simply, it's the process of assigning responsibility and authority to another person. So they are carrying out specific tasks on your behalf. And typically you'll find delegation happens down the hierarchy. So as a manager, I may have the authority to make a certain decision, but I want to pass that authority on to someone on my team, to one of my subordinates. That would be the process of me delegating. So as we said, typically happens from managers to their subordinates. Now, delegation can be quite effective. It can be quite a good thing in the business because essentially you're training those subordinates. You're training them to have that skill of making those level of decisions. And this can be quite motivational because if you are showing that you trust your employees, their esteem needs may go up. Keep that in mind for Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And that level of empowerment as well just provides them with that hands-on experience. You'll typically find that democratic leaders, they love to do this, they love to delegate. However, the quality of that decision, it depends on who you're delegating to. Because if you're delegating to someone with lots of skills, lots of experience, then, you can trust them. They most likely are going to make a good decision. Of course, if they have the relevant resources. But if you're delegated to someone who is the intern, they've only been on the job for a few weeks, they don't know what they're doing, then maybe the quality of that decision might not be that good. The next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be the difference between centralisation and decentralisation. Once again, I've used these terms already throughout this revision video. But what do they actually mean? Well, essentially, centralisation, decentralisation. It's where the decision-making power and where that decision-making happens. This is where decision-making authority is concentrated at the top levels of an organisation. Remember that concept of delegation that we spoke about, where we're passing on that authority to someone else so they can make the decisions? There's not much of that when we look at centralisation. All the decision-makings are kept with the people at the top of the organisation, maybe in a specific headquarters. And what you'll find within a company that adopts this centralisation approach is that your lower level managers and lower level of employees, they won't typically be making a lot of their own decision making. Typically they will just be told what to do. So in order for this to work, you need strong top-down communication. Now, centralisation might sound a bit harsh because we're not giving that delegation to our employees. However, it can have its advantages. First of all, in a time of urgent situations, maybe in a time of crisis, we do not have the time to ask everyone what they think, what they feel that the decision should be. We need to make a decision very quickly and we need to implement it as quick as possible. Now, the great thing with centralisation is that only a few people are making those key decisions, so it can be implemented quickly. And it can also lead to economies of scale, because what you may do is that you may centralize all the operations and resources. And as we said, we are reducing the likelihood of duplication of efforts from actually occurring. So now we've gone over what centralization means. Well, what does decentralization mean? Well, if centralization is where only the people at the top of the organization can make those decisions, all we now mean by decentralising is that we are distributing the decision-making authority to people who are lower within the organisational hierarchy. So when we look at decentralisation, there's a lot of delegation. We are passing that authority and responsibility down the hierarchy so they can make their own individual decisions. So we start to empower those lower level managers. Typically you'll find decentralization when we are operating on a bit of a global basis and we need to react to the local needs of those consumers. But in order for decentralization to work, we need to have effective communication and effective collaboration, because we don't want to run into the issue where we are duplicating efforts. Now, as I said, can be quite good because you're providing empowerment for those managers. And we'll look a bit later on, but empowerment is a key non-financial method of motivating our employees. So what you'll find is that if we are empowering, we're passing on that autonomy, motivation may improve. And not only that, is that those employees or those managers who are closer with their customers, they're communicating with them on a much more frequent basis. Well, they may understand the needs of those local consumers. So what could happen is that they may understand what the better decision making is. Because the problem is, if you only have people at the top of the hierarchy who don't really communicate with individual customers, they may not appreciate the local needs of them. So it increases the local responsiveness, the quality of decisions could get better. And it doesn't also take a lot of time to implement that, because if we were centralized and, I spotted an opportunity with my local market, well, I've got to communicate that all the way up the hierarchy, get approval, then implement it. And by that time, well, that opportunity may have passed. And as well, it develops your managers because they are now having to make those decisions because they are empowered. We're delegating that authority, so we could look at their skill development. The next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be HR flow. Now, HR flow is the movement of people around an organization. Essentially, what HR flow wants to do, we want to have the right number of people in the right place at the right time with the right skills. So there's a couple of ways that we go about doing this. First of all, we look at HR planning. Now, a HR plan, human resource plan, is a strategic framework that outlines how a business will manage its workforce to meet its objectives. So the HR plan, it will help assess the business's workforce needs. So do we have the right number of employees? Do we have the right number of skills? Because if we don't, we can start to identify those gaps in skills, gaps in staff and levels, because that will then help us with our recruitment, selection and training process. More on that in just a moment. We also want to make sure that the HR plan, as we said, aligns with our corporate objectives and outlines any actions that the business needs to take. The next important part of HR flow is looking at recruitment and selection. Now, when we look at recruitment and selection, essentially we've identified that we need a specific person to fill in this specific job role, but at the moment we don't have anyone for that. So what we do, we go through a process of recruitment and selection. All we are doing here is we're looking at attracting the right candidates and assessing them. We want to make sure that we hire the right person, because when the business doesn't hire the right people, it can be quite costly and it causes a delayed process for the business, because you'd have to get rid of the one who's not good for the job and then do the whole thing again. Now, when we are looking at recruitment, we've got two different ways. We can look internally and externally. Internally, all this means we are looking at the employees that we already have within the business. So maybe looking at moving them across the business, maybe looking at giving employees certain promotions. So what we would want to do is we would want to advertise this job vacancy on the local intranet of the company. Now it can be quite good because we're saving time, we're saving money, because we're not using these external recruitment agencies who can cost quite a lot of money. And not only that, but if we are looking at internal recruitment, we should already know quite a lot about the employee. They should be working with us for a fair few months, even a fair few years. So we have a lot of background on the employee. We know what they're good at, we know what they're not good at, and we'll also have a better insight of whether they are the right person for the job. Now the problem is with internal recruitment that if I am taking one employee from doing their job to another job because we needed that vacancy filled, well, now we have another gap because their old job may need to be replaced, so we may need to look at external recruitment anyway. And what we mean by external recruitment is that we're looking for candidates outside of the business, so they're not current employees of the company. So what's good about this is that typically you'll have a larger talent pool, because within the business you may only hire 500 employees. But outside of the business, you may have tens of thousands of potential candidates that could be quite good for the job role. Another important aspect of HR flow will also be about training employees, is that if we're bringing these new employees into the business or moving them around the business, we need to get them adapted to their new specific job role. So we need to help develop their skills. Now we've got 3 different categories of training. First of all, we've got induction training. Now if any of you have had a part-time job, there's a good chance you have had induction training. Quite simply, this is the training that you receive when onboarded into the business. Potentially, they just give you a bit of an introduction, such as health and safety training. They may give you an introduction to the corporate culture, the policies and the procedures, just to help get you integrated into the business. Then we've got a concept called on-the-job training. So now we're looking at really developing the skills of employees, but we do so on the job. So we're not sending our employees to any external environments. We want them to learn by doing the job itself. So this helps them develop skills, gain experience while working in their regular jobs. So you could look at job shadowing, you could look at apprenticeships. Now, on-the-job training is a good method for a business because they are gaining that hands-on experience. And what's also good about on-the-job training is that you're promoting that interaction between employees, that you're getting them to communicate and collaborate with one another, especially if you're looking at job shadowing or mentoring. However, we do have another concept called off-the-job training. Well, if on-the-job training is doing training whilst you're at work, off-the-job training is when you're doing training outside of your usual workplace. So you may go to a conference, you may do an online course, you may be sent to do a degree or get a certain qualification. So you're learning those new skills away from your usual workplace. So why this could be quite a good thing is that you're getting fresh new perspectives. The problem is that as an employee, if I picked up these bad habits and I was mentoring someone, I could then pass on those bad habits to them. But not only that, but we may now have access to these industry experts who give us a fresh new perspective, new ways, new methods of completing the job in a more efficient way. Another important aspect of HR flow, of how we make sure that we've got the right number of employees at the right place at the right time, is this concept called redeployment. Now, redeployment, it's the process of transferring or moving an employee to a different role within the same business often to try and avoid redundancy, and I'll explain what redundancy is in just a moment. But it helps allow the business to retain experienced staff by relocating them to areas where their skills are potentially needed. So this can happen due to organisational restructuring, changes in demand, closure of certain job roles. Now, as I was explaining redeployment then, there's also a concept called redundancy. Now, what we mean by redundancy, essentially, the business will end your contract because your job is now no longer needed anymore. Employees, they will typically face redundancies due to these factors such as business downsizing. We may do a merger or a takeover, so we've got a duplication of job roles. It could be implementing new technology and automation, so becoming more capital intensive, so we don't need the employees anymore. We could also look at outsourcing, so we don't do part of that operations in-house, we get an external company to do it. Or the business may be under financial pressure because economic conditions aren't favourable. The business isn't making as much money, so typically they may look to cut jobs. The next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be introducing you guys to the theories of motivation. Now, whenever you use the term motivation in your exam answers, please try and refer this to one of these theories. Now, there are 3 key ones that we need to know: Taylor, Maslow, and Herzberg. Let's break each of them down, starting off with Taylor. Now, to help you guys remember Taylor, he is the money man. Taylor believed that an employee should get a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. Essentially, Taylor believed that if employees were basically left by themselves, they would do as little work as possible. Now, if you think that's quite harsh, just reflect on your own experiences. When the teacher has left the room, are you always hard at work, or do you start turning around and start talking to your best mates? Now, Taylor thought that. He thought that if employees were left by themselves, they wouldn't do that much work. So they need constant supervision. So part of Taylor's theory of motivation was around giving them money, financial rewards, but also looking at supervision and standardizing work. So the first part of Taylor's motivational theory is that he believed that employees were mainly motivated by financial rewards, an extrinsic factor. And what we mean by extrinsic is just external factors, external rewards. So what he did was he adopted a piece rate pay. And what we mean by a piece rate pay is that the more products that you would produce, the more money you would get. So let's say, simple example, if I was producing pens, for every 1 pen that I would produce, I would get £1. So the principle is simple. The more money that employees want to earn, the harder they have to work. So for example, if I produced 100 pens, I'd get £100. If I produced 50 pens, I'd get £50. If I produced 300 pens, I would get £300. So as you could see with Taylor's theory, he believed that if employees wanted to earn more money, they would have to work harder, and that was the main motivational drive. But remember, it's called Taylor's scientific management. You can't argue with science. But essentially what Taylor did is he conducted these time and motion studies. Essentially, he wanted to find the quickest and most efficient way of an employee to complete their task. So what that would mean, he would eliminate any factors that did not contribute to the efficient completion of the task itself. The next theory of motivation, and probably my favourite out of all 3 of them, we have is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we've got 5 levels in the hierarchy. You need to know the order for your exams. We have physiological, also known as basic needs. We have safety and security, social, also known as love and belonging, our esteem, also known as our ego needs, and at the very top, we have self-actualization. Now, because it is a hierarchy, you can't attain the higher levels unless the previous levels have been met, which basically means that I can't have my social needs met until I've had my physiological and my safety needs met first. So I can't go to level 3 unless level 1 and 2 have been satisfied. But let's break down each of these levels. First of all, we have our physiological needs, our basic needs. These are our basic needs to survive as people. This is food, water, sleep, good rest. Now, essentially how a business can ensure that their employees have a physiological needs met, first of all, don't make them work 24 to 36 hour shifts. You may think that's a bit of an obvious statement, but when we look at the NHS, well, it's not unusual for a nurse to work these 20 to 24 hour shifts. But also as well, we want to provide them with a decent income so they can actually pay and have a living. So they can pay for rent, they can pay for their food and groceries. Next up we have is our safety and security needs. So when we look at safety needs, it's the protection from both physical and mental harm. So when we look at physical harm, think of health and safety. But not only that, we also want to look at job security to make sure that our employees feel secure within their contracts. Whenever a business looks at a merger or a takeover, typically we have job duplications, and as we said earlier, that typically leads to redundancies. So certain employees, they may have their safety and security needs not met. Next up we have is our social needs, also known as love and belonging. So we have to ask this question as a business. Are our employees forming those meaningful connections? Are we getting our employees working in teams? Are they able to collaborate on ideas? Next up we have is our esteem needs. Now this is your desire for recognition and for respect, because you want to help your employees have that sense of accomplishment, have that sense of a positive self-image. Now you can do this in one or two different ways. You can do this extrinsically, giving praise, giving recognition, or you can do it intrinsically. So providing employees with challenging work so they have that feeling of self-accomplishment. Essentially, as we said with your esteem, it's your ego. How good do you feel about yourself, especially when compared to others? And finally, this is a bit of a tricky one, self-actualization. Now, what Maslow argued is that very rarely do people actually ever reach this level of his hierarchy. Now, what self-actualization means is reaching your full potential in life. Now, it's kind of hard to understand when you have reached your full potential in life. Now, what people get this mistaken with is that they think that to reach your full potential, you have to be a CEO. You have to be earning millions and millions every single year. But that's not true, because each individual person, they will have their own personal goals. They will have different things that fulfill them in life. So as a company, you want to make sure that your employees align with the company's values. And you also provide that opportunities for employees to look into personal growth, for their development, for their training, and if they do, move up the organisational hierarchy. And the final theory of motivation that we have is Hertzberg's two-factor theory. And to give you guys a bit of context, Hertzberg's theory came after Taylor's theory of motivation. Because Taylor's theory of motivation is all about extrinsic rewards. It's all about these financial methods of motivation. Well, Hertzberg disagreed with this. He thought that employees were mainly motivated through intrinsic factors. So Hertzberg conducted a lot of interviews with these working professionals, and he identified two key factors within his theory of motivation. We have motivator factors and we have hygiene factors. Now the idea is your motivator factors, they contribute positively to job satisfaction. And your motivator factors are intrinsic methods of motivation, and this links heavily with job enrichment. But whereas our hygiene factors, they are there just to prevent dissatisfaction. They don't necessarily lead to you feeling satisfied within your job itself, but if your hygiene factors are not present, the employee starts to feel very dissatisfied very quickly. But more on that in just a moment. Now, as I've said, Hertzberg's theory of motivation, it links quite heavily to job enrichment, because we are looking at motivating employees intrinsically by giving them greater levels of responsibility, by giving them more meaningful work, by providing them with more challenge and more opportunities for growth. So some examples then of these motivator factors from Hertzberg. Remember, this is all around job enrichment. First of all, you want to provide them with a sense of achievement. Give your employees challenging works to overcome. Now, if you've ever played a video game before, there's a reason why you don't play it just on the easiest difficulty over and over again, because you don't have that sense of achievement. You would get bored very quickly. He also stressed a lot about the nature of the job to make sure it aligns with the individual's personal values, personal needs. Of course, personal growth is also going to be massive, as you want to provide your employees more opportunity for development. Giving them that recognition as well, so once they've done something good, giving them opportunities for promotion, links in quite nicely with personal growth, and of course, more responsibility. All of this links heavily with job enrichment. Now, in terms of our examples of hygiene factors, these are basically our extrinsic methods of motivation. First of all, we want to make sure that we are giving them adequate pay. Herzberg didn't put a lot of emphasis on how much the pay should be, he just said an adequate level. Not hundreds and hundreds of £1,000s a year, but just enough so you can pay for your basic living. Next up we have as well is good working conditions. Now this is the best way to explain what these hygiene factors are and how they prevent dissatisfaction. Let me give you this example. Let's say you're going into your A-level business classroom tomorrow and the year 7s have been in. They've drawn all sorts of diagrams on the table, they've left chewing gum everywhere, your tables are broken, your chair's falling apart. You guys are going to feel dissatisfied very, very quickly. However, let's say the cleaners have been in, let's say you've had new chairs, new desks. You're not exactly going to punch the air with joy, but you've had those feelings of dissatisfaction prevented. He also said around supervision, making sure that you have the right level, not too much and not too little. Also having policies in place that protect the employees, having good relationships in the workplace, and as well, having a good level of job security. Just a quick one, if you are looking for a bit more support with A-level business, whether that's improving your confidence with the content or giving you more support around your exam technique, I run a tutoring program that gives you all the support that you need for your A-level business exams, whether you are in year 12 or year 13. As we offer one-to-one support, small group sessions, online courses, online resources, messaging support, and so much more. If you want to apply for the tutoring program, feel free to check out the links in my bio. Back to the video. So now we've had a look at the different theories of motivation. Next thing that we need to do is look at the different methods. So in this section, we're going to look at financial and non-financial, starting off with our financial methods of motivation. The first one we have is piece rate pay. Now this should sound very familiar because we explain what piece rate pay is within Taylor's scientific management. So just to quickly go over it, all we mean by piece rate pay is that your employees are paid based on the number of units they produce. So for our piece rate pay here, we are giving employees £1 a pen. So the more they produce, the more money they would get. Now it can be good because in theory, to get more money, employees are wanting to produce more, but it can lead them to rushing their work. So maybe we have an issue now with quality. Next up we have is commission. Now commission is typically found within our sales staff, where they would make a certain percentage of the sales that they make. So for example, you see it with our car salesman. So he may be trying to convince someone to buy this car. The car might be worth £100,000. And if he was to get a 10% commission, the business would get £90,000, he would get 10% of the 100,000, so he would get £10,000. Now it can be quite good for the business because you're rewarding your employees on the more units they sell. So they would want to be selling more units. Problem is they can do this in an aggressive way, and we have to ask the question, are they being truthful within their sales pitch? The next financial method of motivation that we have is a salary scheme. Now, all a salary scheme is just a salary. How much money is the employee getting paid, typically on that yearly basis? So it's that fixed payment that they're getting. Now, of course, the more the employee progresses into their roles, the higher their salary should be. So an employee perspective, they would want to work harder, move up the hierarchy because their salary would increase. But it can offer a limited direct performance incentive because I could have two employees on the exact same salary, but employee A works a lot harder than employee B. So it can be quite problematic because they are being paid the exact same amount of money, even though one works a lot harder than the other. And our final financial method of motivation we have is performance-related pay. Now, performance-related pay, this is now a payment system where employee earnings are directly linked to their individual performance. And this is typically measured against certain targets or certain objectives. Essentially, you will have these performance reviews with your line manager, and they are just individuals who oversee your work. Now, we have two types. We've got short-term and we've got long-term. Now, short-term performance-related pay, this could include bonuses, this could include commission based on achieving immediate goals. Whereas your long-term, this involves more pay progressions based on sustained performance, also is sometimes including rewards like company shares. Let's say you've done something quite good in the short term, they may give you a short-term bonus. So you've performed excellently, so you're getting 5% bonus on top of your original salary. If you perform good, so you may have exceeded expectations or you've just about met them, then you could get a 3% bonus. If you've not done very well at all, you may just get no bonus at all. Or we could look at more of a long-term performance-related pay. So how we look at increasing the employee's salary. So if you perform excellently, you're going to have £3,000 extra every single year. If you perform good, your overall salary would increase by £1,000 a year. If you're not doing so good, you have no increase at all. Now we've gone through those financial methods of motivation, it's time for us now to have a look at non-financial methods of motivation. So, starting off with empowerment. I've used this term quite a lot throughout the session. Now, all empowerment is, it's the act of giving individuals the authority, the confidence and the resources so they can make decisions and take control of their own tasks or responsibilities. Essentially, we are giving those employees a sense of ownership. We are showing that we trust them. And empowerment is good for the business, not only because we could help motivate our employees, but it could also help with their skill development. Because if they are taking on more responsibility, taking control of their own work, making more decisions, then this could help develop their skills. It could help them with their personal growth. The next non-financial method of motivation we have is team working. Quite simply, we get people working together in teams. Now this can work quite well, especially when we've got a diverse range of employees, maybe different backgrounds, maybe different skills. Typically you would want team working in your matrix structures and in your task culture from Handy's corporate culture. And when you are getting employees to collaborate with each other, they may start to think more creatively. The level of innovation improves in the business. And of course this motivates our employees. As Maslow said, this is our social needs. Next up we have is flexible working. This is when we are allowing our employees to adjust their own working schedules, maybe their own working hours, where they work from, sometimes in the office, sometimes from at home. The idea with flexible working is that we want to help suit the needs of the individual. We've got several different ways. First of all, we have working from home. So this just allows employees to avoid that dreaded commute and offer them a bit of a better work-life balance and reduce a bit of stress. It can improve productivity because they are in a more comfortable environment, but there are a lot more distractions. We can also look at flexible hours, so employees can just adjust their working hours to fit their own personal schedules. Maybe they've got family obligations. So this flexibility, it can just help increase job satisfaction, reduce the level of burnout, because once again, we provide them with a lot more balance. We could also look at compressed work weeks. So employees could work full time, but just over fewer days. So rather than working 5 8-hour days, they could work 4 10-hour days. Because this will allow the employees potentially having a longer weekend, more of their own personal time back. We can also look at offering part-time contracts. Most of you may have a part-time job at the moment because you need a little bit of money. You don't want to work full-time. You don't want to work 30, 40 hours a week. You may just want to work 8 hours a week. The problem with flexible working is that it can start to negatively impact productivity. First of all, if you work from home, there's lots of distractions like your household chores, family members, other activities. You can also go on your phone without being supervised. Now, without a manager or team leader physically present, employees, they may start to slack off. They may not have that immediate guidance or feedback. Also, when home becomes the workplace, it can be quite challenging to establish those boundaries between your work time and your own leisure time. The next non-financial method of motivation is something that we've already spoke about quite a lot, which is job enrichment. Now, we said job enrichment aligns quite well with Hertzberg's two-factor theory, with the motivator factors. Now, what job enrichment is the process of enhancing a job role by adding more meaningful tasks, more responsibilities, and more opportunities for growth. So you want to give employees more challenging tasks to help with their skill development. You may also look at increasing decision-making power or autonomy, assigning them greater levels of responsibility. So overall, you want to make their jobs more challenging, more interesting and more rewarding. Now, when I read students' answers, they typically get job enrichment and job empowerment mixed up with one another because they are fairly similar, but there is a key distinction. Because empowerment, this gives employees more control and decision making within their current tasks, whilst enrichment adds depth and variety to make their roles more fulfilling and more challenging. So job enrichment, it can involve giving employees more autonomy, but it does so as part of a broader approach to make their work more meaningful. Because empowerment is about autonomy alone, whilst enrichment is about autonomy plus added complexity, plus growth opportunities, plus more meaningfulness in the work itself. And the final non-financial method of motivation that we have is job rotation. Job rotation is the practice of moving employees between different roles or tasks within an organisation over a specific period of time. And what's really important to know about job rotation, we're not promoting the employees, we're not demoting the employees, they are staying at the exact same level within the hierarchy. So they're not taking on more responsibilities, they just have new tasks that they need to do. Now the idea with job rotation is that you want employees to work on these different tasks. You want to give them a bit of variety because doing the same thing over and over again can get quite boring. But not only that, you're getting them to learn new skills, which could be quite useful for their original job role. Now, as an example, we could look at department rotation. So I might be in marketing, but they may say, right, go work in sales for 3 months, go work in operations for 3 months. Because I could learn some useful things from the sales and operations department to help me within the marketing. For example, within operations, I get to learn more about how the product is produced. So when I'm communicating that in our marketing messages, I can showcase that. And of course, with sales, I learn more about the customer insights. I learn more about those customer pain points, the needs and the wants of customers, once again, to help improve my marketing message. The very last thing that we now need to do in this revision video, we'll take a look at employer and employee relations. It's in the name. It's the relationship that the employees have with the business, with the employers. Now, employees and employers, they may fall out over a variety of different things, such as the pay, such as the working conditions. But another important factor will be about the involvement of employees within decision making. But whether employees are involved and how much they are involved within decision making depends on a few different factors. First of all, it will depend on the corporate culture. Now, as I said, in the year 13 unit, you'll learn about a theory called Handy's corporate culture model, where you identified that typically we've got 4 different corporate cultures. First of all, we've got power, where the culture of the business is basically focused on one or a few employees and they have all the decision making power. So if you're a lower level employee, you will not be really that involved with decision making. Then we've got the role culture, the bureaucratic culture, lots of rules, policies and procedures in place. So with your involvement in decision making, depends where you are within the hierarchy. Then we've got a task culture. Now, a task culture is when we want to get employees working in teams. We look at decentralising that decision making by delegating the decision making power to those individual teams. And then we've got person culture, very rare, but essentially the business just exists for the employees. The employees have full autonomy, full empowerment, so they can make their own decisions. It also depends on the leadership that we have. Do we have an autocratic leader where they tell the employees, or do we have a democratic leader where they consult with the employees, they talk with the employees and delegate decision making? It also depends on the type of decision being made, because if we are in a time of crisis, we need to focus on strategic decision making, then you probably wouldn't want all of your employees involved in that. You'd only want the employees at the top of the organisation. But if it's a decision that is concerning them and that will affect them individually, then maybe you want to get them a bit more involved. We also have to look at who the employees are. What are their skills? What are their competencies? What are their experience like? Now, of course, if we are high on all of these 3 factors, you want to involve them more in decision making. If low, maybe not as much. And of course, any legal requirements, so you have to consult your employees within redundancies. Now, in order to improve our employee and employer relationships, there's 2 different ways. We can look at trade unions and we can also look at work councils. Let's first of all look at a trade union. Now, all a trade union is an independent organisation that represents the interest of their members within a specific industry or workplace. So, for example, you've got your teachers' trade union. And trade unions are so powerful based on the collective bargaining approach. Because when a union of 5,000 members try to demand change compared to just one individual employee, who do you think has more of the bargaining power? Now, trade unions, what they will typically negotiate for, they would want higher wages, better benefits for their employees. They may look at improved working conditions, protect against unfair dismissal, addressing any discrimination, providing more training, and much more. Now, the negotiations between the trade unions and the businesses don't always work out very well, because what may end up happening if these were to break down, we may start to see some strikes. Now, a strike is basically a form of protest. Employees, they just refuse to work. They try and pressure the business, the employer, into meeting their demands. Now, it's quite damaging for these businesses because they've got no employees at work, so they can't meet those level of demands. But it can also backfire on the employees because if they're not at work, they also aren't going to get paid for this. And another way to resolve these employee and employer relationship issues is by using work councils. Now, a work council, it's a group of employee and employer representatives who meet to discuss these workplace issues, such as working conditions, policies, and business decisions. Now, what the work council does is that it aims to improve communication and collaboration within the business. So unlike a trade union, which represents workers externally and negotiates with employers on wages and conditions, a work council operates within the business and focuses on internal discussions rather than external bargaining. So your work councils are a bit more cooperative, whereas a trade union may be more, let's take the industrial action approach and let's go and strike if the agreements aren't met. So what the work council does, it just helps the communication from your senior management and the lower level of employees. Now in your exam, you may actually be asked about the value of a good employer and employee relations. Well, essentially the benefit is that your employees, they feel heard. They feel heard by the business, that if they aren't happy, the business can respond to them. So your employees are more satisfied, they're more motivated, morale goes up, we're communicating a lot better. And it can also help reduce conflicts because if our employees were to go on strike, this is quite damaging for the business's income. So you may find that we have a stronger employer brand, so more employees want to come to our business to work, so we may have better talent, we may have better skilled employees. If you found this video useful and want to continue your A-Level business revision, I highly recommend you check out our video here on Unit 7. This will be part 1 of a free series just because how big Unit 7 actually is, but we're going to go through some key things that you need to know for your exams, including some important calculations, return on capital employed, gearing. We'll also look at business performance, so using SWOT analysis, triple bottom line, and so much more. I really do hope these videos have been helping you guys out with your revision. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.